The opinions of guests on our show are not necessarily that of the Program Podcast. Also, please note that this podcast is not intended to give you any medical or mental health advice or any diagnosis. So please, if you have any issues, visit your family physician or your psychiatrist for diagnosis and advice. Now on with the show. It's time to get deprogrammed. All right, everybody, welcome to Deprogram Podcast. I've got a few notes before we start the show today. Of course, my guest is Jonathan Royle. He is a hypnotist and an NLP practitioner. He's over 30 years, and he's going to be telling you how cults indoctrinate you. 8 steps. Before we go on, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, click that bell, and click that like button. This is a video version, so you get to see us today, and that's important. Also, in the show notes, Jonathan's links will be there, but I'm going to have a couple links to some new released books by Cal Korff. There's one on Wendell Stevens, and he's got one out on Annie Jacobson, so it proves all the, basically, why these stories and why these cases are just all false, and he gives you the real facts. So I think that's important. Check these books out. They're on Amazon, and I will provide you the links to check them out. So go support Cal's books and purchase them if you're interested in hearing real solid information and details about long-standing UFO claims and cases. Also, I'm going to have a link to the Discord channel. You can go in there. It's a backup. You know, like I said, I'm not on there much, but it's a backup to talk to people. Or subscribe on the website. You just put in your email on the website in the newsletter part, and it will let you know whenever we have a new post out. That basically means there's a new podcast out, so you can get informed. So those are 2 ways to do that, and all the links are in the show notes. So today, this is a really good show. It's really important because Jonathan really goes over how you get indoctrinated, what type of psychology that you have to have. It's, you know, any of us could do it. Any of us could be in this position where we are indoctrinated. So he goes through all those steps. So I think this is an important one to listen to. Please share these podcasts because that's how it gets out. This is a new podcast, so I'm rebuilding a platform all over again. So you're sharing and letting everybody know who's interested in this is important. And let's face it, at some point in life, all of us could potentially be a target of some type of cult. So I think this episode is super important. Remember, also, October is Halloween month, so I'm going to have some spooky ones. We're going to have Satanic Panic in October. We're going to have Kieran Woodhouse back on the show. He's going to be talking about his new theories in paranormal investigation. And I'm going to have folklore Steve Stockton coming on talking all about the history of Halloween and different folkloric Halloween beliefs. So I am getting a little spooky in October, so you can tune in for those shows. And let's get on with it. Let's hear what Jonathan Royle has to say. All right, everybody, welcome to Deprogram Podcast. Today on the show, I have a guest who has been on my old podcast, Jonathan Royle. And Jonathan has been a stage magician and hypnotherapist for over 30 years. He is well studied in NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, self-help, personal development, and improvement strategies for, to help yourself live a better life. And so today he's on the show. He's going to talk to me about how people get indoctrinated in cults and how they can get out and what you can do if you've been, manipulated by cults, and how you can heal and things that you can do to make yourself better and not get into cults anymore. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Hi, Melissa. It's great to be here. Thanks for asking me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. It's a new show, but I thought, you know what, you'd be the perfect person to understand mind control. But before we get into it, and I let you just take the stage and get into how people get indoctrinated, let's define what we're talking about when we say cult, because people will have all sorts of ideas of what that means to you. When you're talking about a cult, what are you talking about?
Well, I think perhaps the best way to answer that is to give an example. And the example I'm going to give is that took place on the evening of the 18th of November 1978, when Jim Jones, the cult leader, so that's the context here of cult, persuaded his followers to drink a drink basically that was laced with cyanide. Yeah. And ultimately, by the following morning, almost 1,000 members of the People's Temple, as that cult was called, had died, many of them children. And actually, that's where the expression drinking the Kool-Aid is from. Kind of reference to. Don't believe everything so easily.
Guys, I intend to do a total deep dive on this show about Jim Jones, because we cannot not do that. But whether it will be me or a guest, I'm planning it. I'm researching a lot. So Jim Jones will come up, but he is the father of the drink the Kool-Aid thing. Exactly.
And I've made some notes here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know we always go off on different angles, but so in regards to Jones, he's kind of one of the, if you like, major examples out there, but he's certainly not unique. I mean, we've all heard of Charles Manson, who talked his followers into committing brutal murders. There are cults galore. I mean, Scientology is officially deemed to be legal status of a religion, but ultimately it is a cult in the sense of the way it recruits people, keeps them on board, regularly has them confessing things through auditing, which we'll go into more depth of these things as we break it down. Isolates people from their families, all of the elements of what make up cults in the sense of people seeing it as something where there is a leader who's got a nonsense philosophy, but is able to, through psychological, emotional manipulation, brainwashing, social conditioning, engineering, call it what you will, techniques, convince people to believe often the most ridiculous things to the exclusion of any logic from anyone else, to the point where they close off anyone, however long they've known them, who disagrees with the belief systems and the so-called philosophies or teachings of that movement, which is the kind of innocent words they would use. Come and join our movement, or our where in actual fact, when you get under the surface, anything that's taking people away from their family, their friends, or trying to condition them to believe only what that movement is telling them, to the point where if anyone else disagrees, they are encouraged and conditioned to push those people away and in fact cut them off completely.
Yeah.
Then that is where it becomes a cult.
Right. And one of the things I'm going to say before we go into the process, because there's a huge process, I've gone over these processes probably in other things, but I'm sure Jonathan could add something. But cults tend to be on the decline in terms of physical locations like churches, but they are on the rise on the internet. And that's an area that we'll probably touch on, because internet cults and social media cult leaders using the internet to manipulate people is massive right now.
There's a very fine line between what I've just described and people recognize through those examples as being cults, Scientology, Jim Jones, Charles Manson, the Sons of God, sex cults, and all these things. There's a very fine line between that and celebrity, which is why it's often termed as the cult of celebrity.
Yeah, the cult of personality.
These days, social influencers, as they get called, and the clue's there. They're on social media platforms influencing people. And the really successful ones of these, and I'm not saying that, they start off in nefarious intent, but some of the ones that are really successful in the sense that they end up making lots of money, make their money through sponsorships from big companies. And the ethical dilemma of whether or not they truly believe in what those companies offer kind of, I think, goes out the window with a lot of these people, because
Yeah.
it becomes all about the money, and then it steps over into that level of, well, you follow me already, so you're effectively buying into my personality cult.
Yeah.
So people will now pay me tons of money because you're more likely to believe whatever I tell you is good.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this every day in social media, influencing people, the so-called cult of celebrity. And arguably that is effectively much the same, practically identical to getting people to believe in a sex cult or a religious cult like Scientology.
Yeah, the three bases of cults are money, sex, and control. That's the groundwork of them. So to start out with, I want to look at how someone gets indoctrinated in cult. And it's all going to start off, I'm assuming, with the psychology of the individual, because they've got to be able to manipulate in the first place.
Well, the fact is, nobody will. Elements of this also are the answer to how to avoid getting indoctrinated into cults as well, or how to help people to some degree who may be vulnerable to such things. Because nobody would ever end up in a cult or believing things that seem ridiculous to the outsider if they were thinking rationally and logically, and were independently researching and getting their own evidence from multiple different sources. Then the chances are they could come to the logical conclusion that people outside the cults do of, what nonsense. Unfortunately, the vulnerable, or the people who get conditioned into a state of vulnerability, will be human beings, and age is irrelevant to this. Financial worth in life is irrelevant. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter what colour or creed you are. There is no set, that person is.
Yeah, there's no set demographics.
The only demographic that is relevant is whether or not the human being has a good level of self-worth, self-respect, and self-love. If they feel worthwhile in the world. Because if they feel worthwhile in the world, then they've kind of got a suit of armour, their self-respect, their self-worth, their self-image, their self-esteem, that will help them think logically and rationally and avoid cults and wacky theories and nonsense.
Yeah, and a lot of people with that, that low self-esteem, they've got a lot of shame and guilt. They want to belong somewhere and they just don't have that power themselves. And you notice them, they may not even just be in one cult. They'll go from cult to cult.
They want to belong, because quite often people who don't necessarily haven't fully learned how to love themselves, and I don't mean in a selfish way, although that said, you've got to be selfish to be selfless. Like on an aeroplane, you've got to put your oxygen mask on first so that you're not going to pass out and potentially then your kids get killed. You put yours on first, apparently selfish, to be able to selflessly help the others.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good metaphor.
If you've got this weakness, a gap, in religious terms, sometimes people go, I found God and it felt like a gap was filled. Well, it's the same. People in cults often say, well, there was a gap in my life and this filled it. Cult survivors said at the time it felt like it filled it. And that's because of the techniques that were used.
Yeah. I often get the sense like I would hear people that believe in a lot of alien cults that they felt like they didn't belong here, that they wanted to go home. And there's no such thing. They're here. And that's a weird, like they're outcasts. And I think something happened in their childhood. Interesting. So now that we've touched on this, I mean, we can go into it more, but so we've established what type of person is, and I mean, it's hard to know if you're that type. It's hard to know if you're that type of person.
Everybody potentially is. Okay?
Right. Okay,
it's
that's
about
good.
Everyone potentially is. Of course, you're not born that way. It's very much largely environmental, and that old nature nurture debate thing. This is definitely about nurture your environment when you're young, the formative years, because every human being wants to and needs, well, not necessarily psychologically consciously knows that they want to, but needs to feel, to be whole and not be vulnerable. They need to feel loved, wanted, needed, appreciated, cared for, cherished and valued. Because when those are in balance, then they will have good levels of self-esteem, self-image, self-confidence, and willpower, self-control. And in turn, if they're at a high level, they will have a good self-worth, self-love. They'll just feel worthwhile in life.
Yeah.
If any of those is out of balance, out of sync, so they've been bullied at school,
or they're overspoiled.
It can work the other
like
extreme
we're
as
not
well.
talking about just neglect that way. Like you could be like horrifically spoiled and allowed to be abusive as a child. So it could go both ways. There's a balance.
It can. Anything that goes kind of from the norm, from what you would logically, rationally consider natural, whether it's negative or at the time apparently positive because they're allowed to do more things, either way can cause an imbalance. That's what we're talking about. And if there's an imbalance in any of those areas of love, wanted, needed, appreciated, cared for, cherished, and valued, it will have a knock-on effect on the self-esteem, confidence, image, and control, which has a knock-on effect on their self-worth, that their inner self, the self-love, and create that gap. Now, we all have a gap to some degree, because none of us are perfect. We all have...
Exactly.
It's how big is that gap? Most people can get by, a bit of reassurance from their loved ones, the family, the friends. Cool. But what if you're a particularly vulnerable person because for whatever reason you're quite shy, you've not developed a lot of friendships, and you've felt the odd one out for ages because you got victimized or bullied for your skin color, your hair color, maybe. I got bullied at school over being the ginger nut. It could be because of your family background you come from. I got bullied over the fact my dad was a circus clown. It doesn't matter what it is, but if you felt, and that's all that matters, if you felt bullied, victimized, or different,
not accepted,
that hole can become bigger.
Right.
To the point where then people start searching for something to fill that gap, whether it's religion or whether it's seeking out friendships because they got bullied. Nobody wanted them on the sports team at school. They didn't really have friends. And then suddenly along comes this person who shows an interest in them, is incredibly friendly, introduces them to more people who are also friendly, and then introduces them to the fact that they meet up once a week and talk about and X, Y, or Z.
This can happen in relationships too, people. Just so you know. Listen to this for abusive relationship because this happened to me. So keep going. Sorry.
And then so they might get invited along to this meeting, and they think, oh great, this person who I've become friendly with has got other friends they've introduced me to. They're all going to be together and other people. So they end up going along because at this point there's no red warning lights. So I mean that's suppose if we put this into kind of 8 steps, this is step 1. Where they identify the potential recruit. So they will be looking out for people who haven't got lots of friends around them, who are sat lonely on their own regularly in the coffee shop or in the bar, when they're on the lunch. They will target people who haven't got friends around them, and then they will befriend them, slowly catchy monkey, to the point that they'll introduce them to other people so they feel they're starting to get a support network, and those people will praise them up about every little thing about
love bomb
the dress. Exactly. Well, that's stage 3.
Is it? Sorry, skipping by.
Stage on the big level, that's stage 3, because on the low level, through words, compliments, buttering them up, flattery will get you everywhere. That's kind of stage 2, and making the person then feel so good about themselves that they want to be around that person who introduced them to the group, and they want to be around the group
connection.
So then they get invited to a meeting of X, Y, or Z, whatever it may be, and they kind of, even if there's a little element of conscious doubt there or warning sign, by this point they don't want to upset the person that they become friendly with or the people that they've befriended through them, so they kind of feel obliged to go. Now, when they go to that, they will very soon get stage 3, which I dubbed, and many people have, love bombing, which is what you just mentioned, which, to read the kind of definition of this, it's a cascade of affection, support and approval poured over the recruit. A woman born into David Berg's Children of God cult recalled this technique as a wave of peace and love. Berg's organisation was also notorious for its use of flirty fishing, as they called it, a form of evangelical prostitution. In other words, the young male recruit was enticed in by the good-looking female who offered him sex on a plate, which to the geeky,
right, incel kind of
bullied
guy,
outsider who was still a virgin, all these gifts and Sundays and Christmases and birthdays had come at once. And wow.
And the irony is that flirty fishing girl is part of the cult, and she's been programmed and manipulated to be promiscuous, which is really sad.
Yeah, down the line, as started off, got recruited in the same way.
Exactly.
But now he's getting used as a glorified prostitute to recruit people. So they find a weakness. So with the weird, geeky outsider male, it could be that he's never, been able to attract a female. And don't get me wrong, there's cults where they will also use, get homosexual males to recruit other homosexual. There's not a sexuality thing here.
Yeah.
Although some cults do have abhorrently rules within them about you can only be one sexuality, and yet other cults, it's quite clearly a free-for-all.
Yeah.
It's about depersonalizing the individual. Once they've had that love bomb, stage 2 compliments, stage 3 love bomb, they're in that group, they feel like, wow, all my birthdays, Christmases have come at once, so I'll come to more meetings. And during the course of those meetings for several weeks, and also in between them when they'll bump into, apparently accidentally, but it's all part of the plan, they engineer situations, quite often these cults, to look innocent and synchronistic, but in actual fact they've been carefully planned out. This is kind of step 4 where the dream is sold to them, the benefits of being in the group. But they're not going up to them and say, hey, join our group. They're just letting the person observe the happiness that these other group members have got. The fact that they all seem to be wonderfully happy, the fact that, they've got all the money they want, or all the cars they want, or they've got all the sex they want, or the freedom they want. It's different for all cults, but there's elements of all of these to some degree in pretty much all of them. But they're not going, look at me, look at me. They're doing it subtly so that the person they're recruiting sees it and then aspires to gain those things into their life. So then they're psychologically in a position where they're practically begging to become a member of that group. But no one's asked them yet, but they're thinking in their head, I wish they'd asked me, but it's unlikely, because no one ever asked me to join the sports team at school. I'm the kind of person nobody asks, but they have been friendly, but I better not ask them to join because I'd look daft and I'd feel bad if they said no. It's about getting them to that point where the person's already starting to convince themselves inside their mind that they want to be part of this group.
Yeah.
So that when they do get asked or offered the invite, they snap it up. Rational thought goes out of the window. It's like they've already decided that's what they were hoping for because they've been nudged along to that point. And it's interesting that I just said that nudged along to that point because in England, the British government, which arguably governments are a cult, because government means control of the mind.
Everything you just said there, a company has done to me to recruit me into it. Like everything, hook, line, and sinker, the whole process. It was a financial institution. So, yeah.
Well, network marketing companies do it. Yeah. These multi-level marketing companies do it. Governments do it in certain circumstances to get people to, follow certain political parties or stuff, or to believe certain things. You could say at the moment, as we do this 13th of September 2020, that we're living through the cult of COVID.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the
no
only
kidding.
word I'm going to say so that it doesn't ban the video. But we're living through the cult of COVID, and people have been sold, praised for mask wearing, praised for dobbing in people who don't keep to certain rules. And they're selling them the idea that, you're saving people's lives, even though there may be, many would say there's evidence to the contrary through doing things like lockdowns and mask wearing. The same steps I just talked about for cults, the governments are doing. And that's why I say it's interesting. The British government, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world, the British government has an effect on you, because the British government funded the Tavistock Institute in England, which ultimately, in conjunction with the CIA in America, did the MK Ultra mind control experiments shortly after the wars. And a lot of their findings were then, and are to this day, still used by what we call cults, because out there is evidence to suggest that Scientology, for example, that Ron Hubbard, the former science fiction writer, was, many suggest, and their evidence seems to suggest, was recruited by MK Ultra to create a cult for various population manipulation reasons. So it's happening on all levels. Now that's selling the idea to the person, I want to be in, so then they get in.
Yeah, so once they get in, obviously they have to do a lot of manipulation to keep them there and break them down.
Well, step 5 is tough love. This is where they felt wonderful up to this point. They're now in, but now they've really got to cement that belief in the nonsense philosophy of the cult, the group.
Right.
So I'll quote this here. Step 5, tough love. The gloves start to come off. Well, they come off big style, but in increments. Because the aim is to reduce the individualization of the individual, to make them stop thinking for themselves, but to only think the way the group expects them to induce a sense of dependency. And ways that are often done to do this, members may be deprived of sleep or food. When they're at meetings, they'll be woke up unexpectedly early, kept away unexpectedly late. They'll be put into positions of stress, so their body's in stress positions. These are all classic brainwashing techniques that were used in communist China, and are in the famous book on brainwashing about those things. It's no mistake they're used by cults, because ultimately what they are doing is brainwashing, engineering socially through their controlled environment the outcome they want of you believing whatever nonsense.
Yeah, so they kind of have to break you down to build you back up, right?
To a degree, although they've already kind of done some of that. Some of that breaking down was done for them, because that's why you were vulnerable to be.
They're just finishing off the job.
Unfortunately, yes. So they will start imposing more rigid rules, because they'll say, "Look, great, you're a member, but if you want to now join, like they have multiple membership levels, the inner circle this, inner circle that, or it could be you're a bronze member, silver, gold, platinum." It's so that you're always got a higher level to aspire to, just like in the Masons and secret societies. The same with cults. Exactly. Different levels to aspire to. And they'll go, "Look, we'd love to bring you into the next level, but there's a new set of rules, and you need to show us that you're worthy and can abide by these rules." But the person wants to be accepted, because that makes them feel loved. They don't want to be pushed away and rejected, because that's the situation that's been set up here, acceptance or rejection. So they want to be accepted, not rejected, so they'll start abiding by more stringent rules and allowing more of their freedoms to be taken away. Again, it sounds like what governments are doing on people. They're also offered rewards, such as, if you abide by these rules for, say, the next week, then we'll let you have an extra hour's sleep a day. You can have an extra hour's meal a day. Or you might get more sexual favors. It's the proper carrot and stick.
It's a good example of this. And we watched it. Well, not me, because I don't watch TV, but The Biggest Loser shows. People get psychologically tortured.
Yeah.
And they do stuff like that.
Exactly.
It's insane.
It's played out on telly these days. Yeah, you're right. It's ridiculous. So other elements is that they will quite often, a lot of these groups use some kind of, I'm going to term it hypnosis, but they may sometimes term it chanting, meditation. It could be all the group dancing together to euphoric music, which ultimately puts you into a state of trance and makes you more suggestible. They will use elements like this as well during their so-called recreational or reward elements to make the person feel good, but also ironically to also make them more vulnerable by putting them into a heightened state of suggestibility.
Yeah.
Which then they will be given what I would call hypnotic commands, suggestions that, you know what, if you were also to do X, Y, Z, for example, we've got a member of the 33rd degree here today, and you're at level 3, and this 33rd degree member, he's told me he likes the look of you, and you know what? I reckon we could fast track you to level 5 or 6, maybe even level 7, if you were to just be very friendly to.
You know what? Just help him and do whatever he needs, kind of thing. Don't question him.
It blatantly is, as it sounds, verbalizing it like this, that's so transparent and obvious. But remember, by this stage, you've taken somebody who had a gap that needed to be filled. They started to feel they'd got friendship and a circle of friends. They felt to feel loved and worthwhile. Then they had something else to aspire to because they've been sold this dream of all the benefits.
Yeah.
Then there's been some tough love where they didn't want to, they felt like they were getting rejected and told off, because they will also be told off for doing things wrong. So they'll be told off badly and punished, but also then they get praised out. So they very quickly learn, I want the praise because this is pain.
It's like it's taking away the love bomb part and then giving them pain and then giving them another dose of it. It creates addiction too, that like process. And the other thing, if they had just come at you and just hit you with, oh, hey, come over here, and this guy wants you to do this and you'll get up to level 6, if they put that out right away, you wouldn't fall for it. It's that whole process that Jonathan has just described that makes you vulnerable to it. You think, why would someone do that? That process is what breaks you down, and you think you wouldn't fall for it? You would be surprised.
But then partway down the line, rather than you meeting up once a week with some cults, although others encourage you from the off to go to them for a bit, but it's more realistic that it slowly catch your monkey. Then they'll go, to get you up to level 10, I'm just using that as a weird example, up to level 10, say, you need to come and do this weekend boot camp. So the bank holiday weekend, come on the Friday, go home on the Tuesday type thing. Stay with us, leave your mobile phones at home. So they'll isolate you so you can't speak to anyone. During that time, they will deprive you of food. There will be rigid rules galore. There'll be the stressing of the body in positions, like I said. They'll perhaps even put you in complete darkness for some of the time. You might even use brutal brainwashing techniques, like putting you in a tank of water up to kind of chest level, but warm body temperature, but in a dark, totally dark room with speakers in all 4 corners where words come in, where they tell you what to believe. And because you're in darkness, without food, total sensory deprivation, and you keep hearing the same message repeated from all 4 different directions, such sensory deprivation, disorientation, and confusion. And these were techniques actually used by military during war times to brainwash people. They've got a long history of these techniques, but that can amplify things. Ultimately, they will aim during that, say, weekend example I've talked of making you dependent on the group so you lose any sense of self.
Yes, and they're also furthering disconnecting you from anybody. They'll create like an us versus them. They'll make you think everybody on the outside is evil too.
Well, that's step 6.
Oh, here's me jumping ahead.
the seeds are planted at the step 5, but step 6 is the big step forward, renouncing your loved ones, where they persuade the recruit to renounce their family, their friends, and indeed anyone who potentially could offer them a reality check. because the more isolated a person is, the more likely they are to invest into that new belief system, because there's no one else to offer them any alternative. So these people will, during these times, they will not be allowed to search on the internet, or if they've got internet, there'll be blockers on it in the commune living areas of the cult, so it blocks certain websites so that they can't get contradictory information, and they will be punished if they bring up or look at contradictory information to what the cults or the religions or the groups philosophy is. Anything that contradicts it, they'll get punished for even looking at it or considering it, rewarded for towing the line of the group and believing in the group and doing the same things as the group, and they'll often get rewarded for saying goodbye to and ignoring family and friends who don't agree with it. You see, the Jehovah's Witnesses, if a member of the family leaves the Jehovah's Witnesses, the rest of their family who are still in the Jehovah's Witnesses just cut them off completely. It's the same with Scientology. It's the same with pretty much all cults, as we're going to call them. So yeah, step 6 is renouncing your loved ones.
Which is so sad, because once you're disconnected from your loved ones, it's pretty much, I hate to say it, but it's like the last hope that you'd have for help.
Pretty much. Certainly once step 7 starts flooding in, which is the introduction of core beliefs. In other words, the final embedding and cementing of what the cult believes, or wants you to believe, because quite often, as we've seen from exposés, the people at the top of the tree in Scientology, evidence has come to light that they're not living their lives when they're away from the followers in the way that will be consistent with what they're teaching the followers they should. And this is often the case in an awful lot of the cults as well that you look at. It's all a facade, because it's a control system to either the person get high on power, or to abuse people sexually, or an element of those, or often to give up their worldly goods. With Scientology, you give up massive amounts of your money, for example. With normal religion, at least, it's just tithing 10%. With Scientology, it's massive amounts. With other religions or cults, they expect you to give everything up. I mean, literally everything.
We have one here in town called the Yellow Deli. It's a chain of delis. That's the money front, and then underneath it is this religious crazy thing, and you're expected to give up all your money to them. And I did a show recently on it, and I didn't realize we had one in town, and it's disturbing because they want you to renounce everything and give up all your worldly things. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad, but it happens. It's exactly what we've just been talking about. And if they can, some of them, the real cults, because I'm not saying any cults are respectable. They're not, by virtue of the nature of what they're doing. But some of them, at least, use purely psychological and emotional manipulation. But your real underground cults, once they've got you into that kind of step where we're up to now, they'll start introducing apparent rewards that now you're in this level, you need to really connect with the ethereal spirit or whatever god they've created, or whatever nonsense, with the mothership, whatever, however ridiculous you can think of, all is possible if you use the cult system correctly. And they will quite often say that, the way to get to the next level of connection is to take one of these, and in will come the use of drugs. Which Charles Manson famously did with acid and LSD. And the more and more people were given drugs as an apparent reward and to bring them closer to the divine connection, or however it's presented or framed, the more rational and logical thought is completely screwed away. And also a level of dependency on drugs, as well as dependency on feeling a sense of belonging to the group and not wanting to be rejected and thrown to nothing, takes them to step 8, which is that the person then themselves reaches a point where they will have a zero tolerance of any criticism. So any criticism or questioning of their beliefs, boom, they will fight back against it, because at this point they're now indoctrinated.
That's what I've been experiencing all day today and all day yesterday. We just did a show on a Billy Mayer cult with Kel Korff, and I have been attacked by crazy cult people. It's been interesting to watch the stuff that they're saying, and really quite humorous. And it wouldn't matter what you said to them. I'm like, no, they want to try and get on the show, and I was like, I'm thinking in my head, I don't think so.
rational thought goes out of the window.
So you can try to manipulate my brain too? Yeah, crazies.
Now, the wonderful thing is, a gentleman called Robert J. Lifton, a psychologist, many years ago, he published a book, and within that he laid out what he called Lifton's thought reform, principles of thought reform. Now, earlier today I put a post on your Facebook wall, and it was regarding elements relating to COVID, but within that post you will see a web link to Lifton's thought reform principles, which people may find of interest. There will also be within that post a link to the 8 steps to mind control, how cults suck ordinary people in, which nicely details in a bit more detail what I've given an overview of. And there's also links to the government's mind space document, which I know we spoke on a different show about it in the context of COVID, but it's relevant to this because those same principles of emotional and psychological manipulation are what are used by the cults.
Yeah. And
they've been tested through heavily funded studies done by the British government's behavioural sciences department, which has been dubbed with the nickname the Behavioural Nudge Unit, which goes back to nudging people along, that I said before. And they're linked in with the Tavistock Institute, which links in with MK Ultra. And
which links in the CIA.
And all of that.
Oh, my God.
And that is why it's worth looking at those links to the Mindspace document, to the Lifton's thought reform, to brainwashing, the PDF on brainwashing, the book propaganda, and all those other links that are in the post that I put on your wall today that you might want to share with.
I'll include that
listeners.
In the show notes. So, I mean, they've got them there, and now trying to leave can be dire results. Like there could be violence, their life could be threatened. It's hard to get out. Now,
incredibly.
So let's
keep
talk
layering
about
things
that.
up.
Yeah, let's talk about getting out now and switching it, and then because there's a lot of brain damage and mental brain damage that happens from these, and what people can do.
Before we speak about getting out, just a couple of key points from Lifton's thought reform. He breaks it down into steps. Some relate to what I've already said. Some go further. But one of them is mystical manipulation, which is that generally the philosophy of the cult or the group will have some sort of, I'm going to call it magic man says, because I'm taking the piss a bit, but some sort of, this is something that for an outsider looking and go, that's so ridiculous. Why would anyone believe it? But when it's introduced to them, it's at a point where many of the elements we've already talked about are in place. So the person will no longer be rationally examining things, already trust these people implicitly, but also is scared of speaking up because they don't want to be rejected. They want to continue to be accepted and move up the ladder. So they will accept these things because they're now at a point where even if they tried to question it, cognitive dissonance would have kicked in, whereby so much of their life is now occupied by doing things that the cult have said and believe, that to then suddenly say, well, this bit's rubbish, would mean they have to accept that lots of the other stuff could be rubbish as well, and that would be painful and make them feel bad. So rather than feeling bad, they allow themselves to feel good by accepting this as truth, taking it on board, however weird or mystical it may seem. And that's why these groups and cults also tend to have their own kind of terminology and language to make people
Right.
feel special, that they are in the know, that they're better than the outsiders. So that's more and more reasons why it becomes so hard
Like
for
there's a lot
people
of
to leave.
there's a lot of, I mean, they outline this in Social Justice Warriors, that they have their own way of speaking, and they want to control the language so
Yeah,
that they dominate stuff. But there'll be people, they'll, and I highlighted this on my first show, they'll drop letters, like instead of using vowels, they'll put X's, or they'll do weird things like that too, where they're like, look, it's almost immature, it's almost like teenagery, childish. I find it's like silly.
but it is it. But that's the thing, they're playing to the person's inner child. That part of them that felt damaged and rejected is now feeling loved. It is effectively, in therapy, it will be dealt with as the inner child, and you're part of dealing with people who used to be in cults to
Yeah.
help them recover. Is a lot of deep inner child work gets done, which metaphorically is dealing with the traumas and rejections that they felt were built up from birth through the formative years of childhood that left them in that vulnerable position
Right.
to be able to be recruited to a cult. So you have to heal those wounds to then be able to give them that inner strength and self-esteem and self-love
Right.
that we spoke about, to be able to become free.
Interesting. So how do they go about, how do they go about doing that? Like, first of all, how, like, do some people just, the abuse is too much and they leave? Like, how do some people, like, I've heard of some people even having to be kidnapped out of a cult from their family members. Like, it's like, what happens for somebody to say, my God, I have to leave? Like, they must have some kind of moment.
It depends how far down the path they've
Yeah.
gone in these things, which I've given an overview of, and you'll see more at the links. If they haven't fully got to, as you'll see it on the notes, if they kind of just getting to stage 5, where the tough love's kicking in, there's still a potential chance at that stage that they might think, why are these people who have suddenly accepted me and now also being nasty as well?
Right.
That can be a time of great psychological conflict. Now that's the point where the cults, through experience, will be very careful, because they'll, when they've done some of the negativity, they'll then leave it a bit and put a lot of praise in, so the person ends up thinking, oh, actually, I will stay. In relationships, it's akin to what gets termed these days as gaslighting.
Yeah.
The that is kind of the pivotal point, because then they're starting to introduce more of the cult about giving up totally any connections with your past on a massive level. Yeah. Now, they may have felt the odd one out and thus been vulnerable, but some people, fortunately, still deep down, although they may not have spoken to family members in years, or they may, have isolated themselves for whatever reasons, they may deep down know that if they were in a deep hole, that there are certain people they could go to. And those people will often at those points question and think, hang on, they're asking me to totally give up any connection with the outside world, even though I've never really gone and seen my family anyway. And those people are more likely to then kick in and start to rebel.
Right.
But unfortunately, the truth is the majority of people who've got to that stage, even though they haven't been told to totally cut off yet, are probably in too deep. Because the people who get pulled in initially, the person's friendly, and then it nearly happened to me once years ago. I was single. I was teenage. I bumped into this very attractive female in a bar. She wasn't drinking alcohol, which I should have thought was a bit odd for her age, stereotypically at that time. But she got talking to me. She was very flirtatious. She then made her excuses and left. I didn't get lucky, so to speak. But she said, "Oh yeah," she practically offered up the idea of meeting up later in the week. I thought, bloody hell, I'm in here. So I met up with her. And again, she had to be somewhere about a couple of hours later, conveniently. This is what I said earlier about engineering situations. But she bumped into some of her good-looking friends as well. And then I got invited to this show that they were all going to see. And this show, bizarrely, was she made mention that there would be a few magicians performing on this. And magicians, by magician, I mean conjurers, like Rabbit from Hat magicians.
Right.
But she knew that I did magic and stuff. But I didn't think that's a bit of a coincidence. I thought, all right, cool, yeah, I'll come along.
Right.
I get there, and it's not until the second magic act of the evening's on that I realise, hang on a minute, he started doing tricks with loaves and fishes, multiplying the loaves and fishes, and he started talking about our Saviour, the Lord Jesus Christ.
Oh.
And each progressing act got more religious and brainwashy. And she was could tell that I said, "Is this a religious meeting?" She went, "Oh, well, just some of the thought." And she started getting touchy and feely, and quite clearly was trying to play up to my perceived weakness.
Right, she's trying to dissuade.
Well, I said I needed to go to the toilet, and I went to the toilet and very quickly went down 6 levels of stairs in this building and left.
Good for you. That's good. You were able to identify that.
Well, that's generally the stage where people are lucky enough to escape who do escape.
Wow.
Because if you've got to the stage we were talking about before, you're generally in that deep that to leave would seem too painful. It would be a sense of rejection. It actually becomes easier to overcome the pain of cutting off ties to the outside world.
Right.
Because by this point, you're apparently accepted by this massive family.
And it's almost like they've created the brain chemistry of addiction. That's why it's so painful, because when you cut off, you actually go through withdrawal.
Precisely, you genuinely do. The acceptance, the love, the rewards, and all that is creating dopamine and serotonin releases that the people genuinely get addicted to. And when they're getting rejected and told off, it's the opposite of that. They feel down. So the idea of being thrown out entirely if they don't toe the party line, it is like a junkie being told, "Do you want your drugs?" Or you're never going to get them again. That is what they've created.
So if someone does get out, what should they do? Like, what should be their first steps? Because they're probably going to have PTSD and a whole bunch of psychological problems. I mean, what would you
if they got out at the early stage,
that
example I gave, generally speaking, the fact that they recognised it and got out is probably going to be enough.
Right.
If they've got further along the line and then ultimately they get kidnapped out of it, rescued, or something happens, and it's going to have to be something really traumatic, like massive. We've heard of cults where the person, willingly would have sex with other people, but then when that's taken by leaders to a bigger level behind closed doors, where they then are physically abusing them as well as sexually abusing them and beating the crap out of them.
The other thing that I've seen is someone becomes sick in like a reclusive smaller cult, and people get afraid. They don't want them to die, and they've taken them to the hospital. This happened in a cult in London that I did a show on called Cult of Jackie, and they were discovered by the authorities at the hospital because it was a baby that was born and raised there for like decades, right? It was Lambeth or something like that, and that's how they were discovered, and they were brought out of the cult, and they still miss it. But I guess if there was that situation where it was removed by authorities, people could get help somehow, or maybe.
There is definitely help. There's definitely ways of, but you've got to deal with that inner child stuff that made them vulnerable in the first place that I've already alluded to. You've also got to do massive work on building up, overcoming the arguably PTSD, as you said, the traumas that they may have undergone whilst being in the cult, and also the PTSD or rejection feelings of no longer being in the cult.
Right.
Then there's the reintegration into normal society and normal beliefs, and ultimately building up their self-esteem. That's the key: self-esteem, their self-image, their self-confidence, their self-worth, their self-love,
Right.
so that they can function as themselves
Yeah.
without the need for this psychological, emotional, or physical, or
Yeah.
metaphysical, or weird crutch.
And depending on when they were put into a cult, they might not know who they are. They
If,
might not
if
have
they
a
were
clue.
born into the cult, to them that would be complete normality, and
Like,
then it would be like starting
yeah,
life again. Yeah, and that is where long-term psychological help of
yeah.
really, really is needed, because
For
those people
people,
didn't know any different.
for people who are thinking, okay, inner child, what is he talking about? That might seem like a weird concept. Like, is it this? Like, do we have some kind of voice inside of us that's still the child? Is it like an
Yeah, I mean,
onion kind of thing?
everyone. The inner child is the voice inside you that tells you that you're not good enough to do something, or that you'll be okay.
That's frightened.
That's frightened or positively praises you. And that, whether it positively praises you or makes you frightened or criticizes you, comes down to the environment you grew up in, on what level of support
Hmm.
you felt you got growing up. And I say felt you got because you may have had the most loving parents, but your perception of what they did could have got twisted
Okay.
through confusion and misunderstanding. And so you ended up feeling that they weren't supporting you with your aims in life, but really they were doing what they thought was best for you, and they really did
Right.
love you and want you. And so it can get confusing. So it's about your feelings and perceptions
Right.
rather
Not
than
necessary
reality.
reality. You have to sort that
No.
out.
Yeah. And that's where it gets even more grey, because cults drag you in through feelings and perception manipulation rather than through reality.
No, see, that is so complicated. It's would be hard to sort out. And because throughout that, you're also going to be going through withdrawal. You're going to be having PTSD flashbacks. You're going to have anxiety about resocializing with people in a society possibly that you were told is evil or fascist or the enemy, or right? Like, there's all these things that are going to be going through your mind.
Yeah, and it can even be worse in some severe cases where people have been multiply abused sexually, physically, and whatnot. Obviously, the cult don't present it as abuse, but it is.
Yeah.
Some
Well,
small
no.
element of themselves may know that it's abusive, and may, well, certainly when they get beyond the cult, as in there's the level of abuse that most of the cult members inflict on each other, sexual and physical.
Mhm.
But then the leaders, behind closed doors, often do things that the majority of the cult don't know about, which
Yeah.
takes things to another level. And those things often get repressed, so compartmentalized in a person's brain, so they don't have to deal with the trauma or abuse at the time. And that can lead to splintering of the person's mind, so-called multiple personality disorder, or
Right.
um, so to help that person get back to normal, you've got to treat each of the individual alters, as they get termed, or different personalities, and help each of those to heal to normality, so that then they can all be integrated back together as the one whole, which they were before they started splintering, so
So,
that the person can become normal and one and whole again.
so a really, really long process.
It can be. The
Yeah.
longer, generally speaking, the longer the person's been in a cult, the longer it's going to take to get them fully deprogrammed.
So I was talking about before how, yeah, cult leaders are a huge problem, but the cult leaders themselves are probably really empty people deep down inside. That's why they have to have all this followers and adoration. They're probably empty, but they need that insecure, codependent mind. They need people to be like that. I don't know if anybody, I mean, I don't think we intentionally raise codependent people, but there must be things that happen to make people feel like they are nothing unless they have some kind of leader, or they have to give their everything to some iconic figure, because there's people who aren't like that.
You know, fortunately, there is people that are not like that, but, you know, unfortunately, we are all born into a world, well, not all of us, most people in most, you know, England, America, and countries such as us, around the world, are born into a world where from birth, from cradle to grave, we are emotionally and psychologically manipulated, indoctrinated on a daily basis through the education system, through politics, through the shows on TV, into what governments want us to do. Governments are the biggest cult, ultimately. And amongst that is created the desire to have more, to aspire to more, to want control. Because by making people, planting the seed in people so that they want more, it will make them more likely to go into debt to buy things they can't afford, for example, which means governments have got control on them. By giving them that aspiration that they want more control in the sense of authority, climbing up the ladder, it means that that person themselves becomes more vulnerable to accepting what these perceived authority figures tell them needs to be done in order to climb up the ladder.
Yeah, I mean, like, in a way, where I'm presenting you as an authority figure. So
And
are we doing that?
You could argue that, except for one key
because
thing.
I know somebody will say that.
Except for one key thing. What most, in the context we've been talking about, what they will never do is tell you, don't believe a word I'm saying.
Check it
at
out.
Face value. Independently research it for yourself. Hence, the links that will be there to Liftons Thought Reform, other people giving you examples. And then don't even believe what they say. Independently research it for yourself. Go with your gut feeling. Go with your heart. Does it feel right? Does it make sense?
Well, and also you have to be logical. Like, if the cult is telling you that they are in contact with the Pleiadians and the UFOs, I mean, you have to have a solid sense of reality. You can't believe the crazy ass shit that they're saying. And they're like, here's my picture. And people will say, oh, wow, a picture. I'm like, look, people, that's 2 plates glued together. It's the dude's craft project.
Yeah.
But
show me proper evidence, and then rationally go, and I will go and also, reference it through multiple independent resources. And if I come to the same conclusion, that it's what you said it was, then I'm going to believe. But I'm going to believe because I've found that the evidence genuinely points that way. I'm not going to believe that you, as the perceived authority figure, because you say it must be true, because that is what cult leaders are.
Yeah.
The authority figure, in the same way as a government is. That's why during all this COVID nonsense, which by nonsense I don't mean it doesn't exist, okay? It's real, and tragically people have been dying, okay? But not to the levels when you do digging that it gets blown out proportion in the media of. The media are, I'm going to say it, a cult. They're cult-like in their techniques.
Well, if they're not a cult, they're certainly part of the brainwashing aspect of something larger that we're not aware of then.
Exactly. Well, because they help manipulate the public's perception of things to what the governments want. Government meaning control of the mind. So, the biggest cult on the planet is governments. Cult is effectively all about control, whether that's control of thoughts, emotions, feelings, power, money. It's control.
Movement, activities.
Yeah. Freedom.
How many children you have or don't have, they'll control that.
Literally anything and everything, But
now it's your sexual identity and words that you do or don't use.
Yeah, and this is a disturbing thought for people, I know, but what we've talked about is cults, as though all cults are negative. Well, I kind of think to a degree they are, and that includes governments.
Right.
Because anyone, anyone who wants control over other people shouldn't be trusted straight away.
Yeah, especially the severity of the control, like to a point. Obviously I'm controlling my child when he's little so he navigates safely, but my whole point of that isn't to control him forever. It's to he's a baby, he can't live on his own. My point is I'm controlling these things and slowly pushing him in a healthy way so he's independent and I don't
To be
control
able to
his
do it for
movements as much.
himself.
So
Yeah.
I am controlling some things, but it's because I understand that it's a dangerous world. He can't understand all these things. I know because I've been a child myself, and the whole point is for him to be independent, right?
And you summed it up there. Because if the actions of control clearly to a blind man are ones that are going to lead to the individual not being able to do things for themselves or think for themselves or whatnot, then that's bad. If those elements of control, such as in parenting, when done well, as you've just given an example of, are to lead to that individual becoming an individual with the freedom and ability to do things for themselves and think for themselves, which is the direct opposite of governments and cults, then that is to be encouraged and applauded.
That's why a healthy family is key, because we're not you don't want to control you want to let them express themselves and tell you what they like and give them those options to pick things, whether it's Christmas or whatever it is. But I do see parents who try to over control their kids, and it's not healthy, because your job isn't to make your kids also mimic you back so you're happy all the time with what they say. Your job is to allow them to express themselves, grow healthy, but you're telling and explaining things and navigating them, like I said, so that they make it to be an adult and live.
And that's a perfect. The bigger picture of what Melissa just said is how to recognise the difference between someone who's got your best interest at heart and someone who hasn't.
And what, like, is there a way to tell right off the bat? Is like
gut instinct. We all have it. Instinct. But people don't often trust themselves.
Because we've been trained not to.
Partly because of that, and partly because we doubted ourselves in the past, or hence the saying, don't let your head rule your heart. You should go with what your heart is telling you. There's more neural connections going from the heart and from the gut to the brain than there is the other way around. There's now been discovered. Go with your gut instinct. We've all had that experience where you walk in a room and you think, I don't like that person over there, or the atmosphere is something's going to happen. Those feelings are very real. Start to follow them. And, those little gut feelings, most people that I've encountered who've ended up being involved in a cult or a religion, which I'd still call a cult, and then getting out of it, eventually getting deprogrammed and getting back to a sense of normality, whatever that is, I've more often than not, when I spoke with them, have said that right back at the beginning, when they replay things to the first meetings with these people, there was a gut feeling there or something like that. There was an element of...
I had that with that financial group. I had this gut instinct and I ignored it because I was also in a bad relationship who was crazy. He was a crazy Antifa guy. So I was getting it from both ends and I ignored it. And I was like, you're so stupid. You knew. People know. I think they do.
Yeah, and that's it. Just follow your heart.
It's too good to, especially if someone's love bombing you and saying these good things. It's like, it's too good to be true. And like the saying goes, when you love somebody, you can set them free. You don't have to keep them right beside you.
The warning signs are there. The best way to protect yourself from getting involved in a cult is to go with your gut feelings, to follow your heart, not your head, because your head will try and tell you, hey, you know what? They're praising me. I should... No.
Yeah.
You'll still have that...
Yeah,
your
head will
justify.
Your head will say, no. There's nothing wrong. Logic is good if you're looking for evidence, but sometimes your head will trick you, and you'll be like, because you'll try to judge. You'll say that feels weird that they did that, and your head will go, oh no, they're just doing this and this and this, and it can trick you up. So I don't want people to think we're not saying don't be logical.
Oh no, definitely not. But the trouble is, these people know that logic isn't the most wonderful thing. Your imagination, your unconscious, your subconscious mind is far more powerful. And as all hypnotists and persuasionists and cult leaders know, if you can paint a picture with your words to create seeds implanted into the person's imagination that conjure up images of, by going with this group X, Y, and Z can happen with my life. That even if logically, consciously, your mind goes too good to be true, the imagination, when the imagination and the human will or conscious mind are in conflict, the imagination will always win.
Right. And it will play out a fantasy scenario for you.
Yeah.
And you'll prefer that.
Quite often, and that's what they play on. So before it gets to that level, you've got to, the moment your gut goes, something's not right, or you just walk away.
Yeah.
Because that's a damn sight easier to do.
And don't get caught up in, if I walk away, I could be missing out, because they'll get you there too. It's like the fear of missing out on something great. It's like, fuck it.
The grass is never greener on the other side of the fence. Now, it may be in the context of a garden that you've not tended to yours and the person next door has.
Yeah.
But quite often then it turns out the reason it's so great all year round is because it's astroturf, not real grass. There's something about it. Things are not as they seem. Stop trying to aim for more and more of what other people have got. And instead concentrating on having better and better of what you have and who you truly already are. It's
like Jordan Peterson says, you make your bed first. You get up, you structure your day, you eat your breakfast, your coffee, you do your fitness, you go to your normal job, and you just slowly progress. Little goals and things that you do every day. You don't have to have somebody come and offer you the moon and the stars and lure you in. You have to work on your own self-esteem. If you accomplish little goals and little tasks all the time and achieve things, that will actually help your self-esteem too.
Massively, because it ends up having a compounding effect. Yeah, massively. So yeah,
I was going to say, do you have any last words? Because we're over an hour, we can wrap it up in a bit. But do you have any last things to finish it off that you want to tell people more about? I'll let you take the end here.
Well, to protect yourself, obviously the other element, kind of said, follow your heart, follow your gut, and all that. The other element is to build up your self-esteem, which you briefly just covered there. Lots of little. You must set goals in life, of course. And if you only set little goals, you'll only ever achieve little things. That's very true. So aim for the widest, furthest distance galaxy. And then if you don't manage that, at least you'll end up near the stars, which may be further than you would have ever thought possible in the first place.
Right.
But by the same token, then you've got to break it down into lots of little easy manageable steps. You can't just go out the next morning and suddenly hit the stars. You've got to work backwards and go, what would I have to, I'd have to be able to do that. I'd have to be able to do that till you get to the point where you're back where you are now, and you broke it down into little bite-sized chunks that you can achieve something positive on a daily basis. And by achieving something little and positive on a daily basis, you find that a few days down the line, a week's gone by, and then it's not just the effect of 7 days. The compound effect of 7 little successes is out of proportion to those 7 little successes.
Right.
And so it is after 4 or 5 weeks. It's not 5 weeks. It's massively more powerful. So it is after a year. And that's how you move towards not just success, but also having a true feeling of worth in life, feeling that you're worthwhile. You're training your inner voice in your head, standing in front of a mirror and saying to yourself verbally out loud, I love myself, I am capable of all possibilities in life, and saying it again and again, sort of 20 times in the morning when you get up, and 20 times just before you go to bed when you're most suggestible.
And the other thing I say to people, like, okay, you're going to have hard times in life. You could be going through a divorce. When you're going through these traumas in life, like, that's not the time to be joining some new group.
Stress and trauma make you think irrationally.
Yes.
That is the time when you're going through stress and traumas that you would be better off getting some help. And that could be as simple as going to magicalguru.com, my website, clicking on therapy, and on there is a free hypnotherapy treatment session that will help you relax your mind and body and make you feel more positive about yourself and help you build up a psychological force field, if you like, a safety shield of positivity and protection, so that you increase your self-worth, self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-love.
And if you guys have and the coverage and the money and the ability, and you're going through trauma, you should seek and that's tough too, because some therapists aren't. There's problem in the therapy community where you get narcissists and stuff in there as well. But if you can seek a reputable therapist and have someone solidly guide you, so that you have that support instead of turning to some kind of law of attraction group that's going to take all your money. Ironically, like I've seen that too.
If you're gonna have any kind of crutch, let it be one that will be helpful to you, not detrimental. So in other words, don't turn to drugs, alcohol, all that kind of stuff in excess. You're far better off getting a therapist. There's no shame in it. In fact, it's a way of helping you offload blame, shame, guilt, and regret, and feel better about yourself. But yeah, you've got to be careful, because there's a lot of charlatans and people out there on a power trip. So again, follow your gut instinct, follow your heart. If at any point you don't feel you're getting the right vibes, I hate to use that term, but if you feel you're not getting the right vibes from the therapist, literally just stop seeing that therapist and seek out somebody else. Because if you're going to have a crutch, you want one that's going to be helpful in the short term, but in the long term is going to encourage you to throw that crutch away just as soon as you're empowered enough to not need it anymore.
Yeah. And you got to be autonomous, and it's okay to have walls up. It's okay to have your walls up. Not everybody gets to come in. You only have to have a few friends. You don't have to have everybody to love you. Yeah. Earned slowly over a long period of time. Exactly. Absolutely. Well, it's from what we just discovered, I can see why it's confusing, this whole world, and why people get into cults, and why our parents are kind of afraid to let us go, because it's a scary world out there. But I want to thank you, Jonathan, for coming on and trying to help people navigate that. And thanks everybody for listening. I will put all of Jonathan's links in the show notes for you guys, including the one he sent me and the link to his website, so you could get that hypnosis therapy video treatment that he talked about. All right. So thank you guys.
And the good thing about that is it's virtual. It's in the safety and comfort of your own room. You never end up speaking to me again. So if for some reason you haven't got good vibes off me during this interview, you can still use that session. There's no danger of me getting you to do things that you don't want to do.
And you can turn
I'm
it
not
off.
there and I'm not in contact, and you can turn it off. Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you, and we will see you on the next show.
Thank you. Goodbye.